Alrighty, so in this video we are going to continue our discussion with React state and events. So the first thing to understand about React events is that, you'll see that in the documentation, they actually are a abstraction over browser events, kind of in the same way jQuery does it. So if I capture this event, I can go ahead and say console log e, for example, and pull this guy over here and open up my console. And I can see that the React event passed in is actually what's called a synthetic event, which allows us to basically use a consistent means of dealing with the event object between browsers. And you could read more about synthetic events in the documentation. So yeah, there are a couple other pitfalls with events, and we can talk about those later. So what I want to do right now is basically, to wrap up this example, all we have to do is change the state. So again, remember, if the state changes, the component re-renders. This entire thing gets re-rendered and then merged back in. If I come over here to my React tools, and let's say I change the title to, I don't know, stuff and things, and hit enter, notice how it changes right there. Let's go ahead and trace our React updates too. Notice how by clicking these buttons, there is no React updates, but if I come over here and manually change the count and hit enter, it gets updated. It gets re-rendered. Every time that happens, a new render happens. I can come in here and I can say console log rendering. And I can go ahead and pop open my console. I see one rendering. If I come in here and change the count to 10, I see another rendering. So we see that that function gets invoked every time. But how do we change the state? So to change the state, like I said earlier, never do this.state equals anything outside of the constructor. Do not do this.state.count plus. We did that, came back over here, and hit plus, you'll notice it doesn't work. And it's not so much that it doesn't work, it's that React doesn't pick up the fact that the state changed. As far as React is concerned, this state did not change because we did not do anything to notify React that the component needed to be re-rendered. So how do we change the state? Well, there is a function called this.setState. So do this.setState. This.setState is interesting because it takes in an object, and then that object does a shallow merge. So what do I mean by that? So let's go ahead and do a const count equals this state. Oops. Const count equals this state. And then setState count is count plus 1 for increment. And then for decrement, we'll do count is count minus 1. So what this state will do, or the setState will do, is it'll merge this new object in with our existing state. Now, why is that important? Think about that for a moment. Why is it important that it just merges the state object into our current state object? Well, if I hit plus, notice how the state updates, the count updates, but the header state remains the same. The title remains the same. So only the properties that change, that are different, or not change, or that are different, only properties that are present in the object we pass in will actually be updated. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from changing the title. I can say title inc here, and I can say title, or title deck. There's nothing particularly special about the title. Notice how now the title changes depending on if I've hit the plus or minus button. And then I can also introduce new values in. Like I can say, on the increment, I can say ble equals 10. I mean, we're not using the property called ble anywhere, so it doesn't really matter. But if I look in my React dev tools and I hit plus, notice how the ble showed up. Now, it's important to understand that React does not know when things need to be re-rendered or not. Meaning, let's say I took away the changing of the count in increment. So now the title changes for the first time I click it. The first time I click it, the title will change. But now, nothing changes. And as you see, we do not get a re-render. Or whoops, we do get a re-render, I meant to say. I was actually confused. I was like, why aren't we getting a re-render? I could have sworn. But I didn't have trace React updates on. So now you see, even though nothing of the state is changing, even though it's the same state, by calling setState, a re-render is happening. Because React doesn't really know what values you use and what values you don't use in your render. And sometimes you might use one value sometimes if a particular condition is met, and other values other times. So every time setState is called, everything gets updated. And that's really it for this example. It's not a particularly glamorous or interesting example, but it is small enough to demonstrate these concepts without having to get into a huge monolithic project, which, don't worry, we will do in this course. So I just wanted to kind of introduce these basic concepts. What is a component? What is JSX? How do we mount things? How do we handle events? What is state? So, yeah. In the next example, we're going to do a basic to-do list, and it's going to allow us to introduce a couple other React-y type things and a little bit more of a bigger example. And we will see you guys then.